My girlfriend said, "I'm not coming to your big day. It's not important to me." I said, "I understand." Then I went alone, achieved everything I worked for, and realized she was the only thing holding me back. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. Thanks. I'm not coming. She didn't even look up from her phone when she said it. I was standing in the kitchen doorway in my training gear, hands still wrapped, sweat still drying on my neck, and those 3 words just landed in the room like something heavy had been dropped. "What?" I said. She finally looked up then. Not with guilt, not with apology, just that flat, tired expression she'd been giving me for the past 6 months whenever the subject came up. "Your fight, the championship, whatever it is." She waved her hand slightly, like she was trying to clear smoke. "I'm not going." I stood there for a second, not because I was angry yet, but because I genuinely could not tell if she was joking. "Claire," I said slowly, "this is the regional finals. I've been training for 3 years for this specific event." "I know," she said, simply, flatly, like she was confirming a grocery list. "You know?" I repeated it back to her just to hear if it made more sense out loud. It didn't. She set her phone down on the couch cushion beside her and looked at me with this expression I'd seen before. It was the expression she used when she was about to say something she'd clearly rehearsed, something she'd decided long before this conversation started. "Look," she began, and I already felt my stomach drop because nothing good has ever followed that word in the history of relationships. "I support you doing this. I do. But I've sat through how many of your practice bouts? How many early mornings? How many weekends where you disappeared to that gym? And honestly," she paused, "it's just not something that's important to me. Going there and watching people hit each other for hours isn't how I want to spend my Saturday." The silence that followed that statement was the loudest thing I'd heard in a long time. "It's not important to you," I repeated. "Not particularly, no." I looked at her, really looked at her. This was the same woman who I'd picked up from the airport 3 times in 1 month when her work trips got rescheduled. The same woman I'd sat beside through 4 seasons of a reality TV show I had absolutely zero interest in because she liked it and I liked being next to her. The same woman for whom I declined a guy's weekend trip to the coast because she said she wanted us to stay in and she thought we needed the time together. For years of choosing her in every little way. And she couldn't give me one Saturday. "Okay," I said. She blinked. I think she expected something else. A fight, maybe. A plea. Some version of me trying harder to convince her. "Okay," she echoed. "I understand," I said. And I turned around and walked back down the hallway to our room. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall for a while. Not thinking, not spiraling, just sitting with something that I couldn't quite name yet. Something that felt too large to hold, but too quiet to be anger. It wasn't that she wasn't coming to the fight. That hurt, sure. But the thing that sat in my chest like a stone was the way she said it. The ease of it. Like she'd waited and found it not worth the effort. Like 3 years of my life. 3 years of 5 a.m. alarms and calloused hands and bleeding knuckles and skipped social events and meal plans and ice baths had been placed on a scale, and the scale had barely moved. Not important to me. For words. I picked up my phone and texted Owen. "She's not coming Saturday." His reply came in less than a minute. "You serious?" "Yeah." Man, that was it. That was enough. Owen knew what this meant. He'd been in the gym with me through all of it. He'd held the pads at 6 in the morning when I was still half asleep and breathing through my mouth because my nose was stuffy. He'd talked me down from quitting twice. He'd watched me drop 40 pounds and build back 20 of pure muscle. He knew what Saturday represented in a way that apparently the person I shared a home with did not. I didn't go back out to the living room that night. I told myself it was because I needed rest before the last week of prep. But really, I just didn't trust what I might say. Let me back up a little. I'm 29. I've been with Claire for 4 years. We moved in together 14 months ago. She's smart, she's funny, she's genuinely good at her job, and for a long time I thought she was exactly what my life was supposed to look like at this point. I got into amateur boxing when I was 26. It wasn't some dramatic origin story. I wasn't running from something or trying to prove anything. A coworker dragged me to a gym one evening and something just clicked. The structure of it, the discipline, the fact that every single thing you put in, you could directly measure in what you got out. Life doesn't usually work like that, and this did, and I found that completely addictive. I trained recreationally for the first year. Then I started competing. Small local bouts, then regional amateur circuits, then a state qualifying series. And this Saturday, 14 months of qualifications and 6 months of dedicated preparation for this specific bracket came down to one regional amateur championship bout. The kind that, if you win, puts you on the map in a way that matters. The kind where scouts from national amateur programs show up. The kind where the guy in the corner who's been coaching you for 3 years finally looks at you and says, "This is the one I trained you for." Coach Reed had said exactly that to me 2 weeks ago. He was a man of maybe 11 words a day. That sentence alone was practically a speech. Claire had been skeptical of boxing from the beginning. I'd accepted that. She'd never been into sports, never been drawn to anything physical, and the world of competitive combat sports was about as far from her interests as possible. I'd never pushed her to understand it. I'd just asked her to respect it. And for a while, she did. Or she pretended to. The cracks had started maybe a year in. The sighs when I came home late from training. The quiet resentment when I turned down dinner plans because I had about the next morning and needed sleep. The way she'd say that gym stuff, instead of boxing or training or anything that acknowledged what it actually was. Small things. I told myself they were small. I told myself compromise was normal. That's what you do in a relationship. You find the middle. You adjust. You make room for each other's worlds even when you don't fully understand them. But I was doing a lot of adjusting, and she wasn't doing much adjusting at all. The week before the fight was the strangest week we'd had in 4 years. Not because we argued. We barely spoke. She went to work, I trained, we came home, we made dinner mostly in silence, and we existed around each other like polite strangers who'd agreed to share a space. On Wednesday night, she came into the bedroom while I was going over some footage on my laptop, studying the guy I was fighting, watching his patterns, noting where he dropped his right hand, and she sat on her side of the bed and said, "Are you seriously going to be like this all week?" I looked up. "Like what?" I said. Distant. Closed off. Acting like I did something wrong. I considered how to answer that for a second. "You told me something that matters a lot to me isn't important to you," I said. "I'm processing that." She made a small sound. Not quite a scoff. Something adjacent to it. "I just said I didn't want to go watch boxing," she said. "I didn't say anything was wrong with you doing it. There's a difference between not being into boxing and telling me your attendance at the biggest moment of 3 years of my life isn't important to you." "I have plans," she said then. I went still. "You have plans," I said. "Anya's been planning this birthday brunch for months, and it lands on Saturday, and I already told her I'd be there." Anya. Her friend. Anya's birthday brunch. I turned back to my laptop slowly. "Right," I said. "So it's not like I just don't care," Claire said, and I could hear in her voice that she was building a case. That she'd organized this argument in advance and had her points ready. "I genuinely have a prior commitment." "You could have told me that first," I said. "Instead of 'it's not important to me.'" She was quiet. "Yeah," she said after a moment. "Maybe I could have." But she didn't take it back. She never takes things back. That's another thing I told myself was fine. I was making a lot of deposits into that account. The account where you store all the things you've decided to let go. And I hadn't really noticed how full it was getting until that week. I closed the laptop at 10 and said I needed to sleep. She stayed up. I lay in the dark with my eyes open and thought about how, in 48 hours, I was going to step into a ring in front of a few hundred people and fight the best amateur bout of my life, completely alone. Saturday arrived the way important days always do. Quietly, almost casually, like the calendar didn't know what was sitting on it. I got up at 6. Claire was asleep. I made coffee, packed my bag, triple-checked everything. Wraps, mouthguard, shorts, corner supplies, protein bars, the specific playlist that Coach Reed made me listen to in the car because he swore it dialed in focus. And I stood in the kitchen for a moment. I looked at the hallway that led back to the bedroom. I thought about waking her up, not to ask her to come, just to say goodbye in a way that felt like it meant something. But she'd been the one who made this feel small. So I left a note on the counter that said, "Fight day? I'll be home tonight. No, I love you. No, wish me luck." Not because I was trying to punish her, just because those words felt hollow in that moment, and I'd rather say nothing than say something hollow. I drove to the venue with Owen in my passenger seat, eating a breakfast sandwich and reviewing the fight card. He knew not to bring Claire up. That's one of the things about having a friend who's been in your corner literally and figuratively. He had a read on what I needed. And what I needed that morning was to not think about home. We talked about the fight. We talked about my opponent, a guy named Brett from a gym 2 states over who had a nasty left hook and a tendency to rush forward when he thought he'd hurt you. Owen said, "Don't let him think he's hurt you even if he has." I said, "I know." He said, head movement on the rush. I said, I know, Owen. He said, I'm just saying. I said, I know you're just saying. We parked at the venue and sat in the car for a minute. He looked at me and said, You've been ready for this for a year. Everything else is noise. I nodded. Everything else is noise. I held on to that. The backstage area smelled like liniment and anxiety and whatever they'd sprayed on the floors. I warmed up with Owen holding mitts for me and Coach Reed standing to the side with his arms folded and his cap pulled low, watching with those quiet, measuring eyes. After the warm-up, Coach Reed walked over and did something he never did. He put his hand on my shoulder. He said, You walk out there today as the person you've built yourself into. Nobody took that from you. Nobody gave it to you. It's yours. Remember that. I didn't say anything. I just nodded once. And I walked out. The fight lasted 3 rounds. I could break it down punch by punch, but that's not really the point of this story. What I'll tell you is this. In round 2, Brett hit me with that left hook. He hit me clean. He hit me hard. My knees buckled for half a second and my vision went a color that vision isn't supposed to go, and I heard Owen shout something from the corner, and for a moment everything was just a roar. And in that moment, a completely unprompted, completely irrelevant thought appeared in my head. She's at brunch right now. She's having eggs and mimosas and laughing about something. And she chose that. Over this. I don't know why that thought showed up in that exact second. Maybe because the brain does strange things under impact. Maybe because it had been sitting there all week waiting for a moment of weakness to sneak through. But here's the thing. It didn't make me feel sorry for myself. It made me angry. Not the hot, uncontrolled kind. The cold, focused kind. The kind that lights up your arms and steadies your legs and makes everything sharpen instead of blur. I didn't go down. I clinched. I reset. I survived the round. And then I spent round 3 doing exactly what Coach Reed had spent 3 years teaching me to do. When the final bell rang, I already knew. When the judges' scorecards were read and my hand was raised, I stood there in the center of that ring and the crowd, maybe 300 people I didn't know, made a noise that went directly into my chest. Coach Reed climbed in and hugged me once, brief and hard, which from him was equivalent to a standing ovation and a parade. Owen was louder. Owen screamed something that I couldn't make out because the crowd was still going and I was only half present in my body at that point anyway. I stood there. I'd done it. 3 years. 40 pounds and 14 months, and every 5 a.m., and every meal I tracked, and every social event I'd left early, and every Friday night I'd stayed in instead of going out. I'd done it. And then I felt it. Not sadness exactly. More like a door opening onto a room you'd locked a long time ago. The feeling of having done something enormously important to you completely alone. And looking up from the center of that accomplishment and not seeing the one face you'd expected to see. We went to a place near the venue afterward. Owen, Coach Reed, a few guys from the gym who'd come to watch. It was good. It was warm. It was the kind of celebration that exists between people who actually understand what something cost. My phone had been in Owen's bag during the fight. When I picked it up, there were 11 messages. None from Claire. 5 from my brother. 3 from a college friend who apparently saw that I'd competed via someone's story post. 1 from an unknown number that turned out to be a rep from a national amateur program who'd been at the event and wanted to talk. 1 from my mom, who ended the message with, I knew you'd do it. I told your father. And nothing from Claire. I read the messages. I replied to a few. I called my mom, and she cried a little in the way mothers do when they're actually just proud, but crying seems like the appropriate expression. I did not call Claire. I did not text Claire. I sat at that table with people who'd watched me earn something, and I ate the first real meal I'd had in 6 weeks without thinking about macros, and I felt something settle inside me that I hadn't expected. Not anger. Clarity. She was on the couch when I got home. The TV was on. Some show she liked. She had a glass of wine. She looked comfortable. She looked like someone who'd had a fine Saturday. She looked up when I came in. How'd it go, she asked. I won, I said. Her face shifted. Something moved in her expression. Not guilt. More like the adjustment you make when you realize the social math has changed. Oh wow, she said. That's great. Yeah, I said. I set my bag down by the door. I went to the kitchen and drank a glass of water standing at the sink. She appeared in the doorway behind me. Are you okay? She asked. I'm fine, I said. You don't seem fine. I turned around. I looked at her. And I said, very carefully, Claire, I won the regional amateur championship tonight. The thing I've been training for since before we moved in together. The thing I woke up at 5 in the morning for while you were asleep for the better part of 3 years. I won it. There were scouts there. I got a call from a national program representative. Coach Reed hugged me, which you'd have to understand to appreciate. But trust me, it meant something. I stood in the center of that ring, and I looked around, and there was nobody there for me except Owen and a handful of guys from the gym. And I came home, and you asked me how it went. Like you were asking me about a dentist appointment. She was quiet. That's not fair, she said. Which part? I told you I couldn't come. I had Anya's thing. I know you did. So I don't understand what you want from me right now. I stayed quiet for a moment. That question hung in the air between us. What did I want from her? A week ago, the answer would have been, I want you to come. I want you to be there. I want you to want to be there. But standing in that kitchen after standing in that ring, the answer had changed into something I wasn't ready to say out loud yet. I'm tired, I said. I'm going to shower and sleep. We should talk, she said. Not tonight, I said. And I walked past her. I slept for 11 hours. When I woke up, it was Sunday afternoon. The light was coming through the curtains at that low angle that makes everything look like the end of something. And I lay there and let the previous 24 hours move through me in sequence. The wind, the hand being raised, Coach Reed's voice, Owen's face, my mom's voice cracking a little on the phone, the call from the national program rep, whose name was Victor. I'd saved the number, and the conversation we'd had where he said the committee was watching you in that second round, and you responded exactly the way we look for. The way that felt. And then, the couch, the wine glass. How'd it go? I thought about something Owen had said to me about 8 months ago. We'd been doing road work, running at 6:30 in the morning, and he was in a bad place about a relationship of his own that had eventually ended, and he'd said to me, you know what's worse than someone being against you? Someone being indifferent to you. Because at least if they're against you, you register. Indifference means they've already written you off and just haven't told you yet. At the time, I'd said something sympathetic and turned the conversation back to his situation because it hadn't felt relevant to mine. Now it felt like he'd handed me a map 8 months ago, and I was only just now looking at it. Claire and I talked on Sunday evening. We sat at the kitchen table with coffee, and it felt very civilized and very terrible. She started. I know you're upset, she said, and I understand why, but I also need you to hear me. Okay, I said. I've been patient about this boxing thing for a long time, she said. I've lost weekends, I've lost evenings, I've rearranged dinners and plans and trips that I wanted to take. I've watched you pour everything into something that takes you away from us constantly, and I've never asked you to stop. I've never said quit. I've never made you choose. But I'm also not going to pretend that I love this. That I love watching you come home with bruises and eating 6 meals a day and going to bed at 9:30. That's not the life I envisioned when we started this relationship. I let her finish. When did you realize that? I asked. What? When did you realize it wasn't the life you envisioned? Because we were together for 2 years before I started training. And I've been training for 3 years, so that's about 60% of our relationship. At what point in that time did you say something about it? She looked at the table. I kept thinking it would phase out, she said. That landed differently than she probably intended. Phase out, I repeated. I thought it was something you were going through. A phase. Something you'd do for a while, and then come back to normal. And there it was. 3 years of work. Every callus on my hands. Every competition. Every conversation I'd had with Coach Reed about building something real. Something that could open doors and take me places I'd never been. Every pound of discipline and every ounce of sacrifice. And the person who was supposed to be my partner had been standing in the kitchen the whole time thinking it was a phase. Waiting for me to come back to normal. Claire, I said. This is my normal. She didn't answer. This isn't a detour, I said. This isn't a midlife crisis on an early schedule. This is who I am. This is what matters to me. Not more than you, but the same as the things that matter to you. It's not the same, she said quietly. Why not? Because boxing could hurt you. Because it takes so much from you. Because when I imagine our future, the version I want, there's more space in it. More time. More us. I understood what she was saying. I just no longer believed it matched reality. What you just described, I said slowly, isn't more us. It's more of me being available in the way you want me to be available. On the schedule you're comfortable with. Within the version of me you'd prefer. That's not. You waited for me to phase out, I said. That's not someone who accepts me. That's someone who's been tolerating me while waiting for me to become someone else. The silence that followed was not comfortable. It was the kind of silence that comes after something true. She looked at me across the table with an expression I couldn't fully read. And I realized in that moment that I had been carrying something for a very long time. Not just the weight of her indifference to the fight, the weight of 1,000 smaller moments. The time she told me I was obsessive when I explained why hydration matters in training camp. The way she'd redirect conversations away from boxing when we had dinner with her friends, as if the topic embarrassed her. The sigh she'd give when I packed a gym bag. The passive, constant message that this part of me was inconvenient. That the best version of me, to her, was the version that didn't insist on being fully itself. I spent 3 years building something, I said. And yesterday it paid off in a way I dreamed about. And the first thing you asked when I walked in the door was, how'd it go? With the same energy you'd use for a Tuesday at the office. I didn't know you needed more than that, she said. You didn't know because you weren't there, I said. And you weren't there because it wasn't important to you. I heard my own words land back on me like an echo. And I understood something. Not because I'd been building to a realization like this, but because standing on the other side of that ring, having achieved the thing, having stood in that exact moment of arrival, I could see the shape of everything with a clarity I hadn't had while I was inside it. She had been the ceiling, not a wall, not a barrier I'd had to fight. A ceiling, soft and invisible, a constant ambient pressure that kept me bent just slightly, that made me shrink my ambitions into things she could be comfortable with, that filled my head with doubt whenever I thought about going further. Not on purpose. She wasn't malicious, but the effect was the same. Every time I'd thought about pushing harder, training more, traveling for competitions, taking the thing seriously as a potential path, her discomfort had been a gravitational force pulling me back toward the middle. I'd been flying half throttle, and I hadn't even known it until I went full. We talked for 2 hours that night. There was no screaming. There was no cruelty. There was a long, exhausted conversation between two people who had loved each other genuinely, but had somewhere along the way stopped being right for each other, and who were now sitting across a kitchen table trying to find the words for that. She cried at some point. I felt the sadness of it. Genuinely. She was not a bad person. She had not done anything terrible. She had just been honest, on the couch, on the phone, across the table, in a way that revealed something we'd both been avoiding. We wanted different things. We had possibly always wanted different things. I had just been the one willing to compromise myself down to fit the gap. I don't want to lose you, she said at one point. I don't want to lose you either, I said. But I think we want different lives, I said. And I think I've been living yours instead of mine. She didn't argue with that, which told me more than any argument could have. We didn't break up that night. I want to be clear about that. It wasn't a dramatic exit. It wasn't some cinematic moment where I packed a bag and walked into the rain. What happened was this. We both went to sleep exhausted and sad. We woke up the next morning and made coffee without speaking much. She went to work. I sat at home for a while before my own shift and stared at Victor's number in my phone, the rep from the national program. I called him back. We had a 20-minute conversation that, I realize now, was one of the most important conversations of my adult life. He explained what they were offering. A spot in a training circuit that would involve relocating for 6 months. Intensive coaching under a national program. Competition on a level I hadn't been on yet. An investment in me as a serious athlete on a developmental path. 6 months. Different city. Different everything. I said I'd think about it. But even as I said the words, I already knew what I was going to do. Because I thought about what Claire had said. She'd said she'd imagined our future with more space, more time, more us. And I thought about what she'd actually shown me over 3 years. She'd shown me that my ambitions were inconveniences. That my achievements were items to be checked off and moved past. That the version of me she wanted was smaller and more still and more available. And I thought about standing in that ring on Saturday, looking up, feeling that specific loneliness. Not the loneliness of being by yourself. The loneliness of being with someone who doesn't see you. That second kind is so much worse. I told Claire about the offer on a Wednesday. She went quiet in a specific way she had. A physical stillness, like her body was processing before her words could catch up. 6 months, she said. Yeah. A different city. Yeah. She looked at me. Are you asking me what I think, she said. Or are you telling me what you've decided? I held her gaze. I'm telling you what I've decided, I said. She nodded once. Slowly. Okay, she said. And I want to tell you that her saying, okay, immediately is what made me certain. Because it told me she'd done her own math. She'd sat across from me for 3 days since Sunday's conversation, and she'd looked at the numbers, too, and she'd seen the same thing I'd seen. We'd been growing in different directions for a long time. And neither of us had been willing to say it because comfortable and wrong is easier to stay in than uncertain and honest. I still love you, she said. Quietly. I know, I said. I love you too. But this is the end of it. It wasn't a question. Yeah, I said. I think it is. She looked away. Out the window. There were a few seconds of silence that held everything we'd built over 4 years and everything we hadn't been able to say to each other while we were building it. I should have been there Saturday, she said. I didn't say anything for a moment. What would it have changed? I asked. She thought about it. I don't know, she said honestly. Maybe nothing. Maybe I would have watched you win and felt proud and come home and still wanted different things by Wednesday. Yeah, I said. Probably. But at least I would have been there. Yeah, I said. At least you would have been there. Moving is strange. You put your life in boxes and realize how much of it is actually yours and how much of it belongs to the shared version of yourself that lived in a particular arrangement. Owen helped me move out. He didn't say much. He's not a say much person. But at one point when we were loading the last box into my car, he put his hand on the roof of the trunk and said, "For what it's worth, I've been watching you operate at 70% for about 2 years." I looked at him. Yeah, I said. You're going to be uncomfortable for a while, he said. But you're going to be real. He closed the trunk. I drove to my brother's place, where I was crashing for the month before the relocation, and I sat in the guest room that first night and felt the full weight of the change. Not regret. Not relief exactly. Something more complicated. The feeling of having made a correct and painful decision simultaneously. The way it hurts in a way that is different from the hurt of a mistake. Mistakes have a desperation to them. Correct decisions that hurt have a kind of stillness to them instead. Still. Sad. Certain. I moved to the new city 6 weeks later. I'm not going to describe all of it because this story isn't really about boxing or training programs or what happened to my competitive record after that day. It's about what I discovered when I stood inside the life I'd been building toward and looked back at the shape of the one I'd been living. What I discovered was this. She hadn't been holding me back intentionally. She hadn't been cruel or sabotaging. She had simply been herself, genuinely and fully. And herself was someone who needed a different kind of person beside her. Someone who wanted what she wanted. The steady evenings. The social dinners. The future that looked like the future she'd mapped out before she knew me. There's nothing wrong with that. But I'd spent 4 years quietly reshaping myself around that map. Cutting edges. Smoothing corners. Becoming smaller in the places where I was too much. And the insidious thing about that kind of shrinking is that you don't feel it happening. You feel like you're being a good partner. You feel like you're being flexible and mature and loving. And you are, in a way. But there's a version of accommodation that tips over into self-erasure. And I had been so deep in it that I didn't know I was gone until I came back. The national program was hard. Harder than anything I'd done. The other athletes were operating at a level I'd only imagined. The coaching was more demanding, more precise, more unforgiving in the best possible way. I made mistakes. I lost bouts I should have won. I had weeks where I questioned everything. But here's what I didn't have, the weight. The ambient pressure of being too much for someone. The constant recalibration of my enthusiasm to fit someone else's comfort level. I woke up every morning inside the life I was supposed to be building. And it felt, I want to be accurate here, not dramatic. It felt like breathing correctly after a long time of breathing shallow. Like the difference between surviving in a space and actually occupying it. I talked to Claire once, about 4 months after I'd relocated. We didn't plan it. She called on a random Tuesday evening and I picked up because we weren't enemies. We'd never been enemies. We'd just been two people who loved each other past the point where loving each other was the right answer. She sounded okay. She sounded like herself. She was seeing someone new. She mentioned it the way you mention a weather change, just to put it in the air without making it a thing. I told her I was competing again, that the program was what I'd hoped. She said, "That's great." And this time, I believed she meant it. There was no resentment in her voice. No residue of an argument. Just the clean, flat warmth of two people who had genuinely wished each other well from the other side of a real ending. "Were you happy?" she asked me. "With what?" I said. "With us. With the 4 years." I thought about it. "Parts of it were the best parts of my life up to that point," I said. "I don't regret the time." "But you regret who you were during it," she said. I paused. "I regret who I was pretending not to be," I said carefully. She was quiet. "That's fair," she said. We said goodbye without any ceremony. I hung up and sat in the quiet of my apartment in a city that had nothing of my old life in it, and I felt something settle that had been unsettled for a long, long time. There's something I've been thinking about a lot in the months since. About the story we tell ourselves in relationships. We tell ourselves that staying is strength, that compromise is maturity, that choosing someone is a daily act of generosity. And it is. All of that is true. But there's a thing we don't talk about as much, which is the story we tell ourselves about who we're becoming inside a relationship. Whether we're growing inside it. Whether the person beside us makes us more ourselves or less. Whether their presence in our life expands us or contracts us. And the hardest part about that question is that the answer isn't always dramatic. It's not always a partner who screams at you or controls you or tears you down openly. Sometimes the answer is, they just wanted a different version of you, and you love them enough to try to become it. And by the time you looked up, you'd been trying so long you'd forgotten what the original looked like. I want to be clear about something. This is not a story about a villain. Claire is not a villain. She was honest in her way. She was honest in the kitchen when she said it wasn't important to her. She was honest on Sunday night when she said she'd been waiting for me to phase out. She was honest on Wednesday when she listened to me tell her I was taking the offer and said, okay, without a fight. She knew herself. She just didn't know me. And I hadn't shown her enough of me to let her figure it out earlier. I had hidden the inconvenient parts of myself to make the relationship work, and then I'd resented her for not seeing them. That's on both of us. But mostly on me. I've had to sit with that. The part where I handed someone else the scissors and then complained about being smaller. I competed in my first national level about 7 months after walking away from my old life. I lost. I want to say that clearly. I lost. But I lost completely. Fully. Without a ceiling. Without the weight of someone else's comfort level pressing me down. Without the background noise of a relationship that had been slowly telling me I was too much. I stood in the ring and fought the best fight I'd been capable of, and lost clearly and fairly to someone who was better than me that night. And I walked out of that ring with more self-respect than I'd walked out of the regional championship with when I won. Because the win at regionals had been tinged with the absence of someone who decided it wasn't worth showing up for. And this loss was entirely mine. All of it. The preparation and the effort and the outcome and the walk back to the corner. Entirely, completely mine. That's what I hadn't understood about what she'd been taking from me. Not the victory. Not the success. The ownership. The ability to fully occupy my own experience without the constant awareness of how it was landing with someone who wasn't there. I keep the text thread from that week on my phone. Not the conversations with Claire. The ones with Owen. She's not coming Saturday. You serious? Yeah. Man. That's the whole thing. 3 lines and a 4-letter word. I keep it because it reminds me that sometimes the most important moments in your life are announced in the smallest possible way. No drumroll. No crisis music. Just someone you trust saying, man, like they understand what you haven't said yet. And you being quiet enough to hear it. I'm not going to tell you I'm better off. That word better implies a scoreboard, and I don't think real life works like that. I'll tell you that I'm more honest. More in possession of myself. More aware of the cost of comfort and the value of discomfort. I'll tell you that I make different choices now. Not because I'm colder or more self-protective, but because I understand something I didn't understand at 25 or 26 or 28. The person beside you is either walking in the same direction or they're not. And if they're not, the kindest thing, the most loving thing you can do for both of you is stop walking together and tell the truth about it. Staying together and slowly becoming less yourself to keep it intact is not love. It's just loss at a slower pace. There's a picture from that Saturday. Owen took it without me knowing. It's from just after my hand was raised. I'm standing in the ring with the ref still holding my wrist, and my head is tilted back slightly and my eyes are closed. I look like I'm praying, but I'm not. I'm just being inside it. The moment. Mine and nobody else's. Owen gave it to me months later without saying anything about it. I looked at it for a long time. I put it on the wall in my apartment. Not because I'm proud of the win. Because of what's not in it. There's no one in the front row I'm looking for. No one I'm checking the faces for. I'm just in it. Fully. Alone in the way that is actually complete rather than the way that is simply missing something. And I think that's the thing I keep coming back to when I think about all of it. The fight. The relationship. The choice. The relocation. Everything that followed. She said it wasn't important to her. I said I understood. And it took me standing in the center of my own achievement, looking up at an empty space where I thought I'd see her face, to understand what I actually meant when I said that. I didn't mean, okay, that's fine. I meant, I'm hearing you tell me something you've been saying for a long time, and I'm finally listening. I meant, I understand who we actually are. I meant, I understand that I have been waiting for you to value what I value, and you have been waiting for me to let it go, and neither of us has been willing to say that out loud. I understand. 2 words. Polite, quiet, and underneath them, the beginning of the most important truth I'd ever let myself think. That you can love someone completely and still be wrong for each other. That staying isn't always love. That the loudest thing someone can show you isn't what they say. It's what they don't bother to show up for. I called my mom on the Sunday after I moved out. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which, if you know her, is an act of significant personal restraint. When I was done, she said, "You know what your father said about you when you were little?" I said I didn't. She said, "He said, that boy is going to spend his whole life making himself convenient for other people until one day he just isn't anymore." I was quiet. "He said that about me when I was little?" "You were 9, she said. "A kid in your class was having a birthday party the same day as your regional spelling bee, and you told us you were going to skip the spelling bee because the other kid would have been upset if you missed his party." "I don't remember that," I said. "Your father told you to go to the spelling bee," she said. "And you did. And you won." I sat with that. "He knew," I said. "He knew," she confirmed. He said, "The hardest thing that boy will ever learn is that showing up for himself isn't selfishness. It's survival." He died when I was 23, so he wasn't there to see the regional championship either. But somehow that conversation from my mom about something my dad said 2 decades ago, sitting in my brother's guest room with boxes stacked to the ceiling, felt like the most present he'd been in years. The ceiling metaphor keeps coming back to me. Not walls. Ceilings. Walls you can see. Walls have a presence. Walls make you work to get around them. Ceilings are different. Ceilings exist at exactly the height you're already at. You don't notice them until you try to stand up straight. And then there's this surprising resistance. This soft but firm limit. And you can choose to keep your back slightly bent to live within the space. Or you can finally straighten up and feel the structure above you and decide what to do about it. I bent for 4 years. I told myself it was comfortable. And maybe it was. But comfortable and correct are not the same word, even though we treat them like they are. And sometimes the most important thing you will ever do is stand up in the middle of a ceiling and refuse to be any shorter than you actually are. That's the story, not the fight, not the win, not the breakup or the relocation or the national program. The story is the moment after the hand gets raised. The moment when you're standing in the middle of your own achievement and you look up and you see clearly for the first time. Not what's missing, but what was always there. The version of yourself that was waiting on the other side of all that shrinking. That person was always going to be there. It just took going alone to find them.